The Flioda Correctional Facility sat like a fortress on the edge of town, its gray concrete walls rising against the southern sky, crowned with coils of razor wire that gleamed under the sun. For outsiders, it was just another prison, hard, silent, impenetrable. But for those inside, it was a world where secrets grew like mold in the damp corners, where every whisper could be a weapon, and where power wasn't always worn on a badge. At the heart of this fortress was Warden Celeste Morgan. At 45, she carried herself like someone carved from stone. Her pressed uniform never showed a wrinkle, her dark hair was always pinned back in the same severe bun, and her voice cut through the corridors with sharp authority. To inmates and officers alike, she was the embodiment of discipline. If the prison had a backbone, it was her. But behind the steel gaze and stiff posture lived a woman who was tired of keeping her guard up, tired of being the symbol of strength everyone leaned on. Celeste had devoted 2 decades to this institution, and it had taken everything from her: her marriage, her youth, even her ability to dream of a life beyond the gates. The prison was her home, her burden, and her cage all at once. Among the hundreds of inmates under her command, one name carried an echo that unsettled her: Derek Cole. 38 years old, serving time for fraud and violent assault, Derek didn't fit the mold of the broken men that filled Flioda's cells. He was tall, with sharp features and a smile that seemed carved to disarm. His voice carried a smoothness that could slide through the tightest locks. Guards called him dangerous. Inmates called him cunning. Celeste called him a problem, though deep inside she knew he was more than that. He was temptation in its purest form. Rumors floated through the cell blocks like smoke. Inmates noticed the way Derek looked at her during inspections, holding her gaze a second too long. They noticed the way she lingered when walking past his cell, the way her shoulders tensed in his presence. It was dangerous ground, and everyone knew it. One afternoon, as she walked down the dimly lit corridor, a voice drifted from behind the bars, low and taunting. "Even the warden's got a heart. She just hides it better than the rest of us." The inmates laughed under their breath, but Celeste's eyes narrowed. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Still, her pulse betrayed her. That night, in the silence of her office, Celeste sat alone, staring at the glow of the desk lamp reflecting off the metal keys that hung from her belt. She pressed her palms against her face, whispering to herself, "I've built my life on rules. I don't get to break them, not for him, not for anyone." Yet as the storm clouds gathered over Flioda, one truth pressed heavier than the walls around her. She was already breaking them, and once that line blurred, there would be no turning back. Celeste told herself it was nothing. Just a prisoner playing mind games. Just a woman who'd been working too many nights, carrying too much weight. But the lie unraveled each time her path crossed Derek Cole's. He was different from the others. Most inmates avoided her eyes, either out of fear or shame. Derek met her stare without flinching, with an almost arrogant calm, as though he could see right past the uniform, right past the reputation, into the woman underneath. That look was dangerous, and it made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't felt in years. It started small. A casual exchange in the corridor. A remark slipped through the bars. He had a way of making words sound like secrets shared only between the two of them. One evening during rounds, Derek leaned against the frame of his cell, his voice low and steady. "You know, Warden, power looks good on you. But it must be exhausting, wearing it all the time." Celeste froze mid-step. Inmates weren't supposed to talk to her like that. It was against every rule she lived by. She should have written him up, ordered him transferred, anything to draw the line in concrete. But instead, her lips parted, and, before she could stop herself, she whispered back, "You should focus on your time, not on me." Derek's smile curved, slow and knowing. "Maybe my time isn't the only sentence being served here." The words hit deeper than she expected, because he was right. She was serving a sentence of her own, one made of walls, rules, and loneliness. That night, she lay awake in her bed, replaying the sound of his voice until it drowned out the silence of her empty house. The days that followed blurred the line further. She caught herself watching him during inspection, noting the way he carried himself, the sharpness of his eyes. He wasn't like the broken men who filled her prison. He was alive in a way she hadn't been for years. And that aliveness was contagious. One stormy afternoon, she found herself alone with him in the laundry room. A power outage had cut the lights, the hum of the generators the only sound. He stood close enough that she could feel his breath, his presence filling the narrow space. "What are you doing here, Derek?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt. "Waiting," he said simply. "For what?" He tilted his head, his eyes burning into hers. "For you to admit you want more than this life you've caged yourself in." The silence between them thickened, charged with something neither of them dared name. Celeste's heart pounded against her ribs. She could walk away. She should walk away. But instead, she stood frozen, caught in the gravity of him. When she finally pulled herself back, she turned sharply on her heel and left without a word. But the damage was done. A door had opened inside her, and no amount of discipline could close it again. Weeks passed, and what began as glances and half-spoken words grew into secret meetings. She told herself each time it would be the last, that she'd regain control, but the lies stacked higher than the walls of Flioda. Letters slipped through hands. Fingers brushed in passing. And then, one night, when the world outside was silent and the guards had grown careless, Celeste let herself cross the line completely. She returned to her office afterward, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back wasn't the warden anymore. She was someone vulnerable, reckless, and alive. But as the dawn crept over Flioda, Celeste understood what she had done. She hadn't just broken the rules. She had broken herself open to a man who thrived on control. And once he had a hold of her secret, he would never let it go. At first, Celeste thought it was nothing, just exhaustion from long shifts, the weight of secrets pressing on her body the way the prison's walls pressed on her mind. But when the fatigue deepened, when the nights were filled with fever and the mornings greeted her with nausea that clung to her like a shadow, she knew something was wrong. She went to the clinic in town under a false name. Sitting in the sterile white room, she twisted the strap of her leather purse until her knuckles turned pale. The doctor, a calm woman with kind eyes, returned holding a chart. "Mrs. Morgan," the doctor hesitated, glancing at her face. "You tested positive for HIV." The words dropped like bricks. Celeste blinked, her throat dry, her mind refusing to understand. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It has to be a mistake." The doctor shook her head gently. "The test was confirmed. I know this is difficult, but with treatment." But Celeste didn't hear the rest. The air in the room seemed to vanish, and the walls pressed closer. She stumbled to her feet, muttering a thank you that barely made it past her lips, and rushed out into the cold evening air. Driving back to Flioda, her hands shook on the wheel. Flashes of Derek's smile haunted her. The way he had leaned in, the way he had whispered promises only to leave her with this. A sickness that wasn't just in her blood, but in her soul. That night, she sat in her darkened kitchen, a bottle of whiskey uncorked on the table. The burn in her throat was nothing compared to the fire of rage and betrayal tearing her apart inside. She whispered to herself, over and over, "He did this to me. He ruined me." The next day, she confronted him. The cell block was quiet, the guards posted at the far end. She walked straight to his bars, her eyes blazing. "What did you do to me?" she hissed. Derek looked up slowly from the book in his hand. That smirk, the one that had once disarmed her, spread across his face again. "What's the matter, Warden? Don't like the gift I left you." Her knees nearly buckled. "You knew," she whispered. "Of course I knew," he said, leaning closer. "But you still came to me. You begged for me. Don't pretend you didn't." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You destroyed my life." Derek's voice dropped to a cruel softness. "No, Celeste. I made you feel alive. Now you'll never forget me. You'll carry me, inside you, until the day you die." The words sliced deeper than any knife. Celeste staggered back, gripping the keys on her belt as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. For the first time in her career, she felt powerless inside the prison she commanded. She spent the following weeks in a fog. Every mirror mocked her. Every guard's glance felt like suspicion. She buried herself in paperwork, but the pages blurred with her tears. At night, she dreamed of chains tightening around her wrists, of Derek's voice whispering her name from the darkness. She wanted to confess. She wanted to scream. But the fear of exposure pinned her down. She couldn't let the world know the warden had fallen for an inmate, couldn't let them see the disease now crawling through her veins. Her reputation, her career, her identity. they would burn in the scandal. And Derek knew it. He held her secret like a loaded gun, and with every passing day, the smirk on his face grew bolder. Celeste Morgan, the iron-willed warden of Flioda, had become a prisoner herself, trapped not by bars, but by the infection of betrayal. Derek Cole no longer acted like a prisoner. He acted like a man who owned the prison, or at least the woman who ran it. What had once been furtive glances and stolen moments had turned into demands, each one sharper than the last. It began with small favors. A better meal slipped onto his tray, extra time in the yard, a letter allowed past the censors. Celeste gave in, too numb and too broken to fight. She told herself it would keep him quiet, that giving him scraps of power would buy silence. But silence was the last thing Derek ever wanted. One evening, she found a folded note tucked beneath her office door. The handwriting was jagged but clear. "You belong to me now. Meet me in the storage room, or I'll start talking." Her chest tightened as she read the words. Her world had already unraveled, yet somehow Derek found new ways to tear it further apart. When she entered the dimly lit storage room later that night, he was waiting, leaning casually against the shelves stacked with cleaning supplies. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "I knew you'd come," he said. "You're playing a dangerous game," she whispered. "No, Warden. You are." He stepped closer, his breath warm against her ear. "One word from me, and your career is over. Your reputation gone. The world will know you're not the untouchable Warden. You're just a desperate woman who gave herself to a convict." Celeste's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. "What do you want?" Derek grinned. "Everything. Special treatment, privileges, and you. Whenever I decide." The rage that surged in her chest nearly swallowed her. But so did fear. He wasn't bluffing. If the truth leaked, it would destroy her faster than the virus coursing through her blood. In the following weeks, Derek strutted through the prison as if he were untouchable. Guards whispered about the unusual leniency he seemed to enjoy. Inmates muttered that something wasn't right. Celeste walked the halls like a ghost, her authority eroding one demand at a time. Late at night, she sat in her office staring at the photographs on her desk, the commendations, the framed newspaper clipping that once called her the Iron Warden. They mocked her now. She had built a life on control, yet here she was, controlled by a man in chains. One night, Derek pushed further than ever. During a meeting in the laundry room, he leaned close, his smile venomous. "I should thank you, Celeste. You've given me the best cell, the best food, and more freedom than any inmate could dream of. But the best gift of all, watching you squirm, watching the mighty Warden beg." Her voice cracked under the weight of her fury. "You think you've won?" "I don't think," Derek replied, his eyes flashing. "I know." Celeste left that night trembling, her hands gripping the keys at her belt so tightly her knuckles burned. For the first time in her career, she understood what it meant to be truly powerless. The walls of Flioda had never felt taller, never felt colder. And Celeste Morgan, the woman who had once commanded every corner of the prison, now walked its corridors as Derek's prisoner. The transformation began slowly, but soon even the guards could see it. The once impeccable Warden, Celeste Morgan, no longer carried the same iron posture. Her uniform, once crisp and spotless, began to wrinkle at the seams. Her hair, always pinned back with military precision, came loose in wisps that framed her weary face. The sharp glint in her eyes dulled, replaced by shadows of sleepless nights and whispered fears. She had started drinking. At first, it was a glass of wine in the evenings, a way to quiet the storm inside her chest. But one glass turned into two into a bottle. Whiskey became her new ritual, the burn down her throat the only thing strong enough to numb the voice of Derek Cole echoing in her mind. By the time dawn broke, she was forcing herself under cold showers, scrubbing her skin raw, trying to wash off the shame. Her staff noticed. Captain Ramirez, a loyal officer who had served under her for years, stopped her one morning in the hallway. "Warden, are you all right? You don't look like yourself lately." Celeste forced a tight smile. "I'm fine. Just long hours. You know how it is." But Ramirez wasn't convinced. He glanced at her trembling hands, the faint smell of liquor clinging to her. "If you need support, we've got your back." Support. The word stung. She couldn't tell anyone the truth. They would never see her as their leader again. They would see her as a woman undone by desire, stripped of integrity, carrying a virus that made her body feel like a ticking clock. Meanwhile, Derek grew bolder. He passed her notes scribbled on scraps of paper, each one sharper than a blade. Remember who owns you. Meet me or I'll talk. One word, and your career is ashes. Every time she read his handwriting, bile rose in her throat. But she obeyed, because fear had become her warden, and Derek its deputy. Inmates began whispering. They saw Derek smirk when she passed. They saw the way her eyes dropped, no longer blazing with authority but heavy with defeat. The rumors spread like wildfire. The warden was compromised. At home, her isolation deepened. Her house, once a refuge from the prison, felt like another cell. Empty rooms echoed her footsteps. She would sit at the kitchen table staring at the photographs on the wall. Her graduation from the academy, the promotion ceremony where she stood proudly shaking the governor's hand. She barely recognized the woman in those pictures. One night, after too much whiskey, she whispered to the shadows, her voice breaking. I gave everything to this job, and now I'm the one behind bars. The next morning, she walked the halls of Flioda with hollow eyes. Guards exchanged uneasy looks. Even the inmates sensed blood in the water. For a woman who had built her life on control, the cracks were spreading fast, and everyone could see it. Derek Cole had managed what no riot, no gang, no criminal had ever done. He had broken the warden from the inside out. The storm came on a Thursday night, rolling in over the town like a dark tide. By dusk, the sky above Flioda Correctional was split with jagged streaks of lightning. Rain hammered against the concrete walls, drumming on the razor wire like the beat of war drums. Inside, the prison lights flickered, then cut out completely. Emergency generators kicked in, but the corridors were left cloaked in an eerie half-light. For most, it was just another storm. For Celeste Morgan, it was an omen. She had been drinking again, a flask hidden in her desk. Her hands trembled as she tried to read reports by the dim emergency lights, but the words bled together. Her mind kept circling back to Derek Cole, the way his smirk haunted her, the way he whispered threats that curled around her like chains. Tonight, with the storm raging, she felt like the world itself was closing in. The intercom buzzed with static, reporting that the East Wing needed inspection. Without thinking, Celeste grabbed her keys and flashlight. She walked through the corridors, her boots echoing against the wet concrete floor. The air smelled of mildew and metal. With every step, her pulse hammered louder in her ears. She reached Derek's block. He was waiting. Even in the dim light, his eyes gleamed, predatory and sure. He leaned against the bars, rainwater dripping from the ceiling onto his shoulders. Evening, Warden, he drawled, his voice low and taunting. Hell of a night, isn't it? Storms always bring out the truth. Celeste's jaw tightened. Step back, Derek. Now. He laughed softly, a sound that cut deeper than a shout. Still pretending you're in control? We both know that's a lie. You belong to me, Celeste. You've belonged to me since the first night you let me touch you. Her flashlight trembled in her hand. You infected me. You ruined my life. He stepped closer, his fingers curling around the bars. No, sweetheart. I gave your life meaning. Without me, you're just a lonely woman hiding behind a badge. With me, you're alive. Admit it, you crave me even now. Something inside her snapped. Weeks of humiliation, fear, and self-loathing surged like the storm outside. She yanked the keys from her belt, fumbling as the flashlight beam jittered across his face. His smirk widened. Go ahead, he dared her. Open the door. You won't do it. You can't. Because no matter how much you hate me, you'll always need me. Her chest heaved. The roar of the storm outside was nothing compared to the roar inside her. She unlocked the door. The heavy metal groaned as it swung open. Derek stepped forward, too confident, too sure of his grip on her. That's it. Come here. Show me the fire I put inside you. But this time, Celeste didn't move to him. Instead, she reached for the steel cuffs on her belt and swung them with all her strength. They cracked against his temple with a sickening thud. Derek staggered back, shock flashing in his eyes. You think you can walk away from me? He snarled, lunging at her. She swung again, the cuffs tearing skin, blood mixing with the rain that dripped from the ceiling. He fell to his knees, cursing, reaching for her. I own you, he spat, blood pooling at his lips. Celeste's voice shook, but it carried a steel she hadn't felt in months. Not anymore. One final strike. His body hit the concrete with a hollow crack. The storm roared above them, drowning out the sound of his last breath. Celeste stood there, drenched in sweat and trembling, staring at the man who had destroyed her life, and whom she had just destroyed in return. The prison was silent, save for the storm. But inside her, a new silence settled, heavy and unrelenting. She wasn't free. She never would be. The storm passed by dawn, leaving Flioda draped in silence. But inside the east wing, chaos lingered. Derek Cole's body lay sprawled across the cold concrete, a crimson pool spreading beneath his skull. The cuffs that had once symbolized Celeste's authority were now slick with his blood. By the time local detectives arrived, word had already spread through the prison like wildfire. Inmates whispered in their cells. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. The warden, the woman they had once seen as untouchable, was now standing at the center of a crime scene. Detective Obadiah Carter, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes, studied her carefully. Celeste stood rigid, her uniform damp from sweat and stormwater, her face pale, but her chin lifted. She looked every bit the soldier, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. "Walk me through what happened," Carter said, his voice steady, almost too calm. Celeste swallowed hard. "He attacked me. The power went out. He came at me, and I defended myself." Carter's gaze drifted to the bruises forming along Derek's temple, to the angle of his broken jaw. He crouched, examining the blood-smeared floor, the scattered keys. His expression didn't change, but his silence pressed against her like a weight. "Self-defense," he repeated. "Funny thing about self-defense, Warden, it usually leaves the attacker standing, or at least breathing." Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream that it was true, that Derek had cornered her, that his words had been knives long before the cuffs had struck his flesh. But the letters, the notes he had sent her, the whispers of inmates, they were all landmines waiting to detonate. As the body was carried out under a sheet, the murmurs grew louder. Some guards looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. Inmates pressed against their bars, grinning, sensing her fall from grace. Back in her office, Celeste stared at the blood still smeared on her hands. She scrubbed them raw at the sink, but no amount of water could wash away the truth. She hadn't just killed Derek to survive. She had killed him to silence him. Detective Carter watched her from the doorway, his voice low, probing. "You and Cole had history, didn't you?" Celeste froze, her reflection trembling in the mirror above the sink. For the first time in her career, she had no answer. By the time the trial began, Flioda was no longer just a prison, it was a headline. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages. Iron Warden turns killer. Local news stations aired footage of Celeste Morgan being escorted into court, her wrists bound in the very cuffs she had once used to control others. To the public, she wasn't the woman who had dedicated 2 decades to law and order. She was the fallen warden, a scandal wrapped in uniform blue. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the proceedings opened. Families of inmates filled the benches, whispering about how the mighty had fallen. Reporters scribbled furiously. Flashbulbs snapped as Celeste entered, her face pale but composed, her eyes shadowed by months of torment. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued man named Daniel Pike, wasted no time in painting a picture of betrayal and blood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, pacing before them. "This case is not about a prison riot. It's not about an inmate overpowering his guard. This is about a woman, a warden, who crossed the line she swore to uphold. A woman who engaged in a forbidden affair with a dangerous convict. And when the truth threatened to surface, she silenced him the only way she knew how. With violence. With murder." His words cut like glass. Celeste sat motionless, her hands folded tightly in her lap, every muscle straining against the shame flooding her chest. Her defense attorney, Linda Graves, rose next. A calm but fierce woman in her 50s, Graves' voice was firm yet compassionate. "Celeste Morgan is not a monster," she told the jury. "She is a human being, a woman trapped in a web of manipulation spun by a man who thrived on power and cruelty. Derek Cole infected her with a deadly disease. He blackmailed her, degraded her, and cornered her until she had no way out. On that stormy night, when he advanced on her, she acted not as a killer, but as a woman fighting for her life." The courtroom divided. Some nodded in sympathy, others shook their heads in disbelief. Detective Carter took the stand, laying out the evidence, the bloodied cuffs, the unlocked cell door, the notes found in Derek's handwriting. His testimony was methodical, but his eyes flickered with doubt when they landed on Celeste. Perhaps he, too, had seen the cracks in her armor, the humanity beneath the crime. Finally, it was Celeste's turn. She rose slowly, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as she spoke. "I gave everything to that prison," she began. "My marriage, my family, my youth. For 20 years, I was the warden. I thought that made me strong. But Derek Cole, he saw what no one else did. He saw the loneliness. He used it. And when I was weak, I let him in." Her voice broke. Tears glistened in her eyes as she faced the jury. "He infected me. He threatened to destroy me. Every day, I lived with the fear of exposure, the humiliation of his control. That night, when the storm came, he told me he owned me. And I snapped. I wasn't thinking of rules or reputation. I was thinking of survival." The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that pressed down on every breath. Even the judge leaned forward, his gavel forgotten in his hand. The prosecutor rose again, his tone sharp. "Survival? Or silencing the one man who could expose your secret to the world?" Celeste looked straight at him, her voice steady now. "Both," she admitted. "I won't lie to you. I wanted him gone. But I also wanted to live." Her confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. The gavel finally struck, echoing through the chamber. The jury's faces remained unreadable, but one truth was certain. Celeste Morgan's fate would no longer be decided by the walls of Flioda, but by 12 strangers weighing whether she was a victim or a killer. The jury deliberated for 12 long hours. Outside the courthouse, reporters camped on the steps, their cameras ready to capture the fall of the woman once hailed as the Iron Warden. Inside her holding cell, Celeste sat alone, staring at the concrete wall, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Every tick of the clock sounded like a hammer striking her future. When the jury finally filed back into the courtroom, the air grew heavy. Everyone rose. Celeste's heart pounded in her chest like a drum of war. She forced herself to look forward, to keep her chin lifted, though her knees threatened to buckle. The foreman stood, a folded slip of paper in his hand. His voice was steady, almost detached. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Celeste Morgan, guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, inmates' families murmured, and guards shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Celeste's shoulders sagged, the last remnants of her strength crumbling. The judge's gavel cracked against the bench, silencing the uproar. His voice rang with finality. "Celeste Morgan, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Life in prison. The irony carved into her bones like a blade. The warden of Flioda would now live behind bars, not as a ruler, but as one of the condemned. As deputies led her away, flashbulbs burst, capturing her hollow eyes, her bowed head. Some faces in the crowd showed pity, others satisfaction. But to Celeste, they were all the same, spectators to her fall. Back inside the prison, in a cell no larger than the one she had patrolled for decades, Celeste sat on the thin mattress and stared through the bars. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "I thought I was free when I held power. But freedom is something I'll never know." Her words dissolved into the silence. Outside, the prison walls stood as they always had, tall, gray, unyielding. But for the first time, Celeste Morgan was on the wrong side of them. And this time, there would be no keys to set her free.